But before we get started, I'd like my panelists to introduce themselves. Each one of you, if you could say your name, where you work, and a little bit about where you work, and then I'll introduce myself last. Brian, you can take it away.
Hey, I'm Brian. I'm one of the founders and CEO of Doppler. Doppler is a secrets manager, so we help companies and engineering teams keep their secrets safe, while also integrating it directly in developer workflows.
Awesome. Blake.
Hi, my name is Blake Vissen. I am the executive director for digital engineering at BODi. We are an online streaming platform that is focused on Hope Fitness workouts. We are the creators of big hit names like P90X, Insanity, 21 Day Fix, just to name a few. We have been very into technology. I run the entire technology departments that build 9 different digital applications and all of the infrastructure needed to support that.
Awesome. Thanks, Blake. Malcolm.
Hey, I'm Malcolm Metalka. I'm co-founder and CTO of Terrateam, and we are a GitOps infrastructure as code management tooling. And I would say we are definitely more on the side of a consumer of secrets managers and people using them. So our users come to us with their secrets management.
Awesome. Yeah, and my name is Chandler Mayo. I'm a senior developer advocate at Doppler, and I'll be your host for today. So we're just going to jump right into it. The report that I'm looking at indicated that many companies don't have a formal disaster recovery plan, which I personally find to be kind of insane. In fact, it actually highlighted that 60% of organizations didn't have a recovery plan. Why do you think so many companies are not planning for the worst? I'll let Blake take it off.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very easy to draw a line to revenue for a company when it's investing in things like features for a platform or an application. I think it's very hard to, um, have a cost center be like security, trying and disaster recovery. Some of these things are they're not seen, and they're kind of it's hard to invest money and time and resources into things that are a what if that might happen. That it's difficult to convince executives that that's an important aspect of technology that we need to spend money on. In a lot of cases, some of these big data breaches, some of these big disasters have helped us point the finger and say, "Hey, look at what happened at Sony over there. Look at what happened with this company X, Y, or Z." And it's made it a compelling argument because the actual cost of it is monumental when it does happen. But it's one of those, "Oh, that'll never happen to our company" kind of situations that a lot of executives just kind of they don't feel like it's going to be a problem, or we're better than that. We're better than, these big name companies that clearly have shown that you're not immune to it. Even the top dogs who that's their focus, right? Even some security companies have data breaches, have massive disasters that come with their data. And it's definitely something that I am a big advocate of, and I use a lot of examples in the recent and even further history to help move the needle on our executives for the spending aspect of it.
Yeah, it definitely seems like it's very easy to fall into the trap of it'll never happen to me,
Right.
right? I mean, 40% of the organization surveys just they don't think it'll happen to them, which is
Right.
completely insane. Malcolm, Brian, do you have any comments?
Yeah, okay, can I hop in there? I think another element of that is, and I think it's going to come up pretty frequently in this discussion, is there's a huge asymmetry between trying to implement a disaster recovery or any sort of security policy and the amount of work it takes to actually do that.
Yes.
And that's a big challenge. But when you think of disaster recovery in particular, you want to recover to some point in time. But if you're a fast moving technical organization, like what is that time? Because you're every day you're changing something and you don't necessarily have a lot of good options there, right? You can sort of ossify your technology stack in some way and say, this is what we want to go to, or you can try to keep up with that. And that's just a challenge. It's just hard to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Brian, I know you have something to say here, so go ahead.
I was actually gonna raise Malcolm's point. So we were strongly aligned there, and Blake, you brought up some good points too. I also think it's one of those exercises that when you go through it, you realize, oh wait, this is actually tremendously harder than we thought. Even with like some of the automations we built in place, like we thought ahead, we covered XYZ. If you really are like investing ahead, you still through that realize A, the automations are broken, or B, they don't have full coverage. And that causes like a downstream set of questions you have to start asking yourself or asking the organization, which leads to a lot more questions. And that ripple effect, I think can lead to a lot of time being consumed in that area answering those questions when you're not answering now the questions of how do I keep moving the business forward. And so now you have these competing priorities. Going back to what Blake said. So I think that's another reason is like they know once they get this process started, it's sometimes I think in their minds better to not know that to even ask these questions than to have a question that now you have to like blatantly ignore.
Yeah, and that's interesting. What are those questions that you should be asking?
A couple good ones. Where are all my secrets? Right. So I'm gonna make the assumption that most companies that we're talking about here don't have a secrets manager. So if you don't know where all your secrets are, you can't protect them, right? So you can't set up access controls and auditing and governance around them. You can't orchestrate them within your infrastructure. And you definitely can't remediate a breach when that happens either. So the first thing is like, where are all my secrets? The second is, do I have a governance suite around it? Do I have access controls? So I can say that the most sensitive secrets are only seen by the fewest amount of people. And then do I have the ability to automatically rotate those secrets without creating more downtime, which would require orchestrating that into your infrastructure and also the ability to actually rotate credentials. And so those are kind of like the primitive set of questions I would start asking myself first, at least around secrets. And that will create a whole downstream set of questions from there.
Got it. Blake, Malcolm, what other cybersecurity questions in this same space are you guys thinking about?
I think I think disaster recovery. So yes, secrets are a concern if you're talking about a breach for secrets, but we've seen you know just we've seen kind of data uh encryption, people hacking in and keeping ransom, right? Demanding money to unlock your data. Having good backups and disaster recoveries that are off that are separate, segregated from your systems in case your systems get breached, right? So that you're able to um, have a recovery plan where it's not going to be a massive downtime. You're not going to have to weigh this option of whether you pay the ransom to unlock and unencrypt your data. Um, Asking questions about like what are we doing for an actual recovery plan, and the having really good documented manuals I think goes a long way. Having good documentation on what are we going to do, and then even practicing it, right? Like it's like we've said before, it's always um, great to have a plan, but if you don't have um, the know-how or the knowledge or have practiced kind of what the steps are to go through here, um, you know, people are going to start blaming each other, pointing fingers, and it's going to become you're going to be thinking about and focused on the wrong goals, the wrong things here. So I would just ask all those questions like, what is your plan? What is the recovery? What other backups do you have? What other systems can you spin up? Do we have infrastructure as code is a huge thing, right? Because if you just went in and built your systems and clicked a bunch of buttons and nobody has that documented or the process and you don't have it orchestrated as code, it's a massive, massive undertaking by the entire team, and it can hurt the business significantly and even bankrupt the business.
That's very interesting. Everything you talked about, though, sounds like a lot of work, which I think is really what's highlighting the problem here.
Correct.
Yeah. Malcolm, do you have anything you want to add?
I just one thing to piggyback on what Brian said, and that is, I think in an organization, it's relatively easy to get some sort of project going to see what our current secret situation is. But time is really important because you do that and then things change next month or next year. And you really have to understand how is this gonna, like, what's the process going forward, and not just what does stuff look like now and then, oh, thumbs up, we're good.
Yeah. Hitting on this same kind of thing, like a lot of the respondents in the survey had varying levels of confidence in their ability to assess their security risks. In fact, it said only 40% felt either very or extremely confident. Why is that? Why is there so much uncertainty about being able to assess security risks? I mean, I get you don't know what you don't know, but what else is there? I'll let Malcolm start this one.
I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head, which is you don't know what you don't know. And if it depends on your organization size. Terrateam, we're pretty small, so it's pretty easy to have a conversation about what tooling we're using and what services we're using, etc. But if you're in a large organization with autonomous teams, you just don't actually know what they're doing, and hopefully you're developing this security conscious culture. But I think it is legitimately scary to just let teams have that autonomy, even though we know it's the right thing to do in the end. And that makes it really hard to be confident about what your actual security landscape looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely agree with that. Blake,
Yeah,
what do you think?
I would jump on that too. In organizations that I've worked with, I've seen the security team, you know, if you have one, they sit off in their own corner, and they're not engineers, they're not developers. They understand what they need to be concerned about, but if they don't create deep partnerships with the developers and kind of they're looked at a lot of times by the developers as a nuisance, as something that is limiting them or stopping them from doing their work. If you don't build a partnership, number one, from the developer side with the security team, or the security team with the developers, to really be embedded and understand the technologies, and how to secure them, or the areas which to secure them, it's very difficult to assess what level you need to be at and what you need to do. I've experienced that firsthand, and it's a hard road if you don't have that kind of trust in the organization, between organizational units within the company, but also between the people who are tasked with securing infrastructure, and the engineers actually writing the applications and code.
Yeah, I like that word used, nuisance. Why? That's really interesting. Is that a communication problem, you think? I mean, it seems like that's kind of what you're getting at.
I think it's a communication problem. I think it's a positional problem on why we're doing this, right? What we're doing, why this is important, and I think it's a lost on a lot of engineers on why security is important, right? The understanding that, like, you need to be securing your applications, or you might not have a job in a few, if a breach happens and then this company goes bankrupt, right? There's I think a lot of engineers don't see security as their responsibility. And I think that's the mentality that, in my organization, I have definitely tried to shift that. But I think a lot of organizations need to change the culture around that.
Yeah, I think there might be something there too about like moving fast and breaking things versus doing it the right way and doing it the compliant way.
Yep.
Yeah, Brian, you look like you have something you want to say.
Yeah, I also think to add on to what Blake's saying, I think the incentives are sometimes inverted, right? Like if you look at security and you said, what would be like if you could design the system from like scratch, and like what would it look like? They'd probably say something like, we're gonna have it's gonna be isolated away from the internet. There's no public ingress or egress at all. It's like tucked away, and there's no one
Air
that,
gap.
yeah, it's air gap. No one could possibly have access to it. And then on the other side, if you ask a developer, they're like, oh, I want all the best developer tooling. I want to move as fast as humanly possible, or even faster than that. And so,
NPM install everything, right?
yeah,
Like,
exactly.
Yeah.
Not even check what the dependencies are, if they've had any like CVEs recently or anything like that. And so that's where the clash happens, right? Is like one side you have very strong productivity. On the other side, we're like, we need to lock this thing down as much as possible. Like the way I kind of, and I think another reason why this game is so hard is just there's like a huge asymmetrical advantage to the attacker, right? So as a defender, as security, your job is like you have a castle and you're trying to build up the walls as high as possible. And your engineers are also building at the same time. So your castle's like growing, like I guess in diameter, but like also the walls need to keep growing higher. And then as an attacker, you just need to find like the one spot in the foundation that has a couple cracks. Take a little hammer, go tick, 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 and eventually it will like the whole thing will start crumbling because you've broken that foundation. Good examples of this happen all the time where like someone gets access to someone's email that leads to GitHub. GitHub has secrets in it. Boom, now you're off to the races. And so that's why it's really, really hard from the security perspective, is because your job is almost to be like 100% right, right? When you're playing the game of like, I don't know what I don't know.
Yeah, and it's hard to be 100% right, for sure. Malcolm, Blake, do you have anything else you want to add before we move on to the next question?
Yeah, Blake brought up this really good point about communicating between security and developers, engineers, and the different mindsets there. And I think that is a really interesting question of how do you actually have a productive conversation? Because I'm much more on the engineering side than the security side. And, we kind of think we're like God's gift to technology because we're so smart. And it is hard to be like, no, like I'll admit I don't know enough about security. And at least for me, a really productive strategy is just get us on the same page of what the problem we're trying to solve is, and not like, oh, you're doing this wrong, but we need security. Here's what security looks like. You got to do a little education there, and then get us both on the same page. And then I think it's much easier to have this productive conversation of here's the things we can do and how can we work together, rather than the security team feeling like an impediment.
Yeah, that makes sense. Malcolm, do you feel like overconfidence from engineers probably plays a little bit of the problem?
It might be. I mean, so there's obviously a lot of variation in the engineering world. There's a lot of discussion about imposter syndrome, but then there's a lot of us too that just think we know everything because we can make a computer do stuff. So there's the whole range, but I definitely think that your average high profile engineer, like someone who's trying to lead a team in a company, probably needs to be handled with a little bit of kids gloves when you're telling them they're probably not doing it the best way.
That makes sense. One thing that I think, so as companies start, they want to build fast, they want to move fast. They're maybe not thinking about security as much. And then as they grow, you get hundreds of employees and thousands of customers, security becomes a concern. How have you managed that transition from startup to growing, or how have you seen it managed successfully? Malcolm, you're welcome to continue if you'd like, or I can give you a break and let Blake go.
I mean, we're definitely still in the early startup point. So we do as much as we can to try to stay lean and offload security to anyone else except for us.
Okay, so what does that actually look like in practice?
We use a lot of like GitHub action secrets actually for a lot. We try to make the interface that if I need to do something or anyone in the team needs to do something that requires a secret, somebody has set up like a CI/CD pipeline that has the secrets there. Then they can just inject their code into that. And hopefully we try to keep what services we're using pretty minimal, so there's not a lot of secrets going around. But hopefully, I never really want a secret, or I never really wanted someone to give me a secret. I want them to give me an environment where it exists.
Got it. Are you seeing secret sprawl becoming a problem?
Not for us internally, but definitely with customers. The more stuff you want to do, there's no real unless you're using like a tool like Doppler or something like that. The sprawl is huge and it's real, and depends on, you're doing one cloud service that has certain things there, another cloud service that has certain things there. And then you have one team that started up before realizing there's a secrets manager they had access to, and etc. So yeah, I mean, it's definitely a problem for organizations that are growing.
Nice. Thank you, Malcolm. Blake, would you like to respond?
Yeah. So, I mean, Beachbody as a company is 20 plus years old. We started on VHS and then quickly moved to DVD. And once about 10 years ago, they realized that everything's moving to video streaming. And so applications were a big thing. And we started almost an internal startup of which was Beachbody on Demand in the company. And that that is the digital applications and streaming platform. And this thing started almost like a startup within a company, an established, billion-dollar business. But it was almost an experiment and it moved very quickly like a startup. And so we built lots of technology very quickly, without consideration to things like security and tooling like that. We built our own internal kind of management platform, which is we have we have just successfully migrated off of after, I've been there 8 years. The Beachbody on Demand has been almost 10 years. And so
Was that used from the beginning?
that was developed slowly over time, which you can imagine is just the pieces of it just were stringed together by different engineers that had different concepts of architecture. I mean, things like building systems where there was no auditing, there was no security auditing. We have invested, number one, from kind of a lot of engineers from the ground up really asked for a lot of these tools. And leadership heard that, and leadership realized that something needed to happen. And our security teams agreed that this is a good path forward. This is a good step forward. So I mean, things like Doppler, things like GitHub Advanced Security, things like disaster recovery systems that we have within AWS, going multi-region, multi-availability zone, though all of these things. And I mean, we were already an established company, but we built it like a startup. And it's taken years and lots of effort, and lots of convincing, executives, on why this is important and why spending this money matters. So I think it takes intentionality, and it takes, you know, uh, uh, a real desire. And I don't think it's just from the top down or from the bottom up. I think it has to merge together. I think you all have to come together, and you have to get buy-in. You have to get engineers that are wanting these tools, and you have to get executives that are approving these tools in the budgets, right?
Got it. Awesome. So you said this process started about 10 years ago, right? It's when you started the digital version of your platform.
Correct.
What did cybersecurity look like for you then, or your secrets management strategy? Did you have one? Was it
No,
just
there wasn't one. There wasn't one. I mean, it's only in the last probably 5 to 6 years that we developed one, and it just kind of came out of the necessity. And I mean, there wasn't SaaS solutions like Doppler out there that would manage this and do it in the right way. So we started to build our own. But again, like we're building we're trying to build fitness software. We're not trying to build, secrets management software. So we don't have the time or effort or engineering talent to invest into these things and how that has these concerns. We just build it for what we needed it for. Um, Doppler has the feature set that we can utilize and leverage, without having to invest engineering time, effort, and resources and maintain systems, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So you said the word necessity, out of necessity. What necessity? What was that? What does that mean?
I mean, it necessity of we have distributed systems. I mean, Malcolm touched on it, right? There's multiple systems, multiple providers that we need to share information between. We need to share these secrets for, um, and there was no central location where these things were stored, and that became unmanageable and unmaintainable.
That makes sense. That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that answer. I think your organization is a great example of how every org is like a tech company now. Like they're all tech companies. They all have these cybersecurity concerns. So I appreciate you sharing those insights about how
Yeah,
you.
we're not a tech company from.
About how
Yeah,
you.
we're not a tech company from. I mean, our founder is not a technologist, right? He's not an engineer. He's a marketer and a fitness advocate. So, um, it's it's different working for this than it would be working for like a company where the founder and CEO is an engineer, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting to see that you have the exact same problems of $100 million tech companies. So I'm glad that you're pointing that out. Brian, do you have anything you want to add?
Honestly, I think Blake covered it like in extreme detail. I would just say, I mean, the one thing I would add, which I think Blake touched on pretty nicely, is that a lot of times when you're going from like a startup to much larger, the problems kind of like creep on you for a bit, and then eventually then you're like, whoa, we have this like big red alarm that like things are going badly. Either that could be secret sprawl from like a DevOps perspective or from a security perspective. But it is like I find that it's even though the problems are growing more linearly or by the scale of the team, that light switch moment where you realize that there's a huge problem kind of like happens in an instant, and then you got to take it very, very seriously. Um, but outside of that, I think Blake did a great job.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. So when cybersecurity concerns arise, especially within engineering teams, how should you convince leadership to act on that? Because we've said it before, like a lot of times it takes pointing at another breach to say, well, that could happen to us. But being in developer relations, I know that that doesn't always work. So what strategies have you seen work or what's worked in your organizations? Blake, would you mind starting us off this time?
Yeah, I I think it's just laying out the case that it's a lot of times it is about what the cost is. Like that's you a lot of times that's the focus of the executives or budgets. That's a lot of what they manage and do. I mean that's a lot of what I manage and do as well. Um, it I I have I mean it was a clear road moving to Doppler from our own secrets management platform that we had to maintain, that we had uh engineering effort and time spent and maintenance on and feature additions and growth. That it was very easy for me to come up with a number that was like this is a cost savings initiative. But on the other hand of it was I had the full backing of our security team when they were looking at, okay, this is actually compliant. This meets all of our SOX compliance, all of our governance, all of the it checked all the boxes, right?
I took the it makes it easy approach.
It
Is that right?
makes, yes, correct. And it not only, and then my argument was it's not only a cost savings initiative. It's not only great, the security team that not only validated everything and feels like this is a step in the right direction, it 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 forces the developers to do the best practices, right? There isn't an opportunity for our engineers to like we don't even give the opportunity for them to check in secrets into code, right? Like that doesn't exist with if as long as we implement this infrastructure correctly. And so those things combined it was a relatively easy sell. Um, and I've approached a lot of our security, a lot of our disaster and backup recovery. I've approached a lot of those conversations very similar to that. And it if you break it down and make it pretty simple to understand why the cost benefit analysis is in favor of implementing these systems. It's a relatively easy sale. Did we lose Chandler?
Oh, sorry, I'm back. Malcolm, what do you think? Do you agree with that, or do you do anything different?
Yeah, so Blake's doing a great job of hitting every point on the head there. Think what I would communicate with people is make sure they realize that this is probably an 80% psychological discussion and then a 20% technology. Like Doppler exists, there's great solutions. You just have to get to the point where everyone agrees and understands the value and why you're going to do it. And then like Blake said, you can just go from there. And once you're there, the implementation, yes, there's challenges, but it's a lot easier once everyone's behind it.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, it really seems like the more voices there are, the easier it is to make these types of arguments. Brian,
Yeah.
anything else you'd like to add?
I think if you're getting pretty strong resistance from leadership on like problem alignment here, I think one thing you could do is be like, okay, we understand from a technology perspective, one secret got out would be really bad. Let's just do a quick scan and find out where how many secrets are in places that they shouldn't be in. Oh, the number came back 5,000. Okay, so that's 5,000 different points of risk to the business and each one of those could take out the entire business or a huge chunk of it. Do we really want to risk that? It looks like that number is growing at 15% per week or whatever per month, whatever the metric is. That's quite scary. At what point do we draw the line and we say, okay, this is too much risk for us to handle? Maybe 5,000 secrets is not enough risk. Maybe 10,000 is. And then now you're in a conversation of like not if but when, and then you can bring that number back down of like, I don't know, 10,000 feels like a lot of risk. Why don't we bring that down to like 200? All right, we're already past it. Let's go.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, it's interesting. How would you even quantify the number having the risk, right? I don't, it's just, that's a hard conversation. I mean, if you were to talk to my legal team, they would just be like, one is
One is
is
enough.
enough, right? Yeah.
Exactly. And that's the conversation you want to have where they're
Right.
like, all right, we're already way past like unacceptable bounds here. And now you're in a winning position to like make a good argument.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, absolutely. We're getting close to the time, but I have one more question for my panelists. What is an underrated security practice that you think more organizations should be adopting? It doesn't have to be about secrets management, just maybe cybersecurity in general. Malcolm, would you give us a start?
I actually see a lot of places still that aren't doing MFA. And I actually hate MFA. It is so much friction when I just want to update something on some screen somewhere, but it's the right choice. Just do it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of like one of those, I think at this point, a lot of organizations see it as like it should be common sense, right? But somehow they're still not doing it.
Exactly.
Blake, what do you think?
Yeah, on that same vein, given the rise of, remote work, everybody seemingly is working on laptops and is carrying with them that everywhere. Having strong authentication and disk encryption. There's a surprisingly large amount of companies that don't have that, and even with the best secrets management and good key rotation, all it's going to take is a moment for an attacker to get a physical access and to a computer and a developer's computer and grab some secrets off that computer and be able to infiltrate the systems. So I think physical access or at least encrypting and strong security from an IT side of things is kind of one of the areas I think is underrated.
Yeah, one thing I've come across before, not at Doppler for the record, is secrets in logs, because logs are something that like we generate them for convenience. It's one of those things where we kind of forget about it until you need it. And then you don't realize you're dumping a whole bunch of information in there that shouldn't be there in the first place. And it's probably not stored in the right way. But you point out like there are so many avenues for like uncovering these things just because you're just not encrypting the data properly.
Yep.
Brian, anything else to add?
Yeah, I'm gonna cheat a little bit and give two. So I think the first one is like I've seen for a lot of companies that, and I'll say more like Series A, B, maybe even like the fast growing Ds, where they have like their disaster recovery plan, and that was generated by like usually like Vanta or SecureFrame or whatever SOC 2 provider. And it's really kind of like this like template that they just like hand to you and they say, you're good now. It's like I would ask yourself, what are all the disasters that could happen, right? Secrets are one of them, but there's plenty of them. And then two, I would strongly recommend practice firefighting, right? Like if everyone is firefighting for the very first time when there's actually a fire, you're going to like have all the communication problems and like nobody's going to be in sync and it's going to feel uncomfortable and people are going to be stepping on their toes. And that's like the absolute worst time to be doing that, is when the fire is like literally burning down the house, right? There's a reason why firefighters drill all the freaking time. It's so that when they're actually in a fire, they're in sync and they're coordinated, and they know, and they have all the steps in their head, and they know exactly what to do. And then because you're firefighting all the time, you'll figure out all the assumptions you made in your disaster recovery plan, or specifically maybe Vanta or SecureFrame made in your disaster recovery plan. And you're like, oh, that one step really is 50 steps, and we don't know how to do any of those 50 steps. We should go have answers to that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
I like.
that's Netflix's chaos monkey model, right? Like, you know, it's like I say we don't actually have hot standbys unless we have failed over. Like that hot standby doesn't actually exist unless we've practiced that, unless we've done that, you know? So there's like, you might put all these things in place, but unless you actually prove that these systems work the way they're intended to, it's not really worth anything.
I have a funny story on that. I was talking with someone, I believe he's one of our customers. He's a friend also. And he was talking about this disaster recovery scenario. And it was like, one of the steps was like, okay, fall back to your like backup set of data. And then he was like, wait, we don't have that. And it was, but he had the disaster recovery plan that was like submitted and everything. And in there was like, okay, we'll like revert back to the fallback. And then he was like, oh, we don't have one. And it was like in the moment.
Great.
Classic scenario. All right. Well, we are out of time. I want to thank all three of you, Malcolm, Brian, Blake, so much for coming and doing this.
Thank you, Chandler.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank you
that's
very much.
Thanks. Bye.